I'm going to talk about the notion of happiness, but I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of dealing with death. And I'm sorry, but this is also a reality in our lives, and we all have to face it. Starting off my story, now, I was born in Southern California, and that's a whole other story I'll do some other time. And a year after the technology that needed to exist for me to live, I grew up in a very happy family environment, loved very much, until 1967. 1967, we were living in the south of, in France, and we were on an Easter vacation, driving from the south of France back to Paris when we were in a horrible automobile accident. Before, seatbelts existed in the car. Both my father and mother were thrown from the car. It was completely demolished. My brother and grandmother were there as well. And I, at age 13, dealt with the police, dealt with the hospital people for 2 days until my Uncle Heidi came. My Uncle Heidi walked into the door and I fainted. Both my mother and father were on the verge of death. I prayed God save one of them, and he saved my father. My mother died age 38. What did we do then? We came back to Turkey. My Auntie Nakiye said, who had 3 daughters of her own, said, I now have 5 children. And what did we do? We made a lot of mistakes then. We were all heartbroken. So I didn't cry, so my brother wouldn't cry. My brother didn't cry, so my grandmother wouldn't be sad. My auntie had to deal with all this. So my one lesson here is, love is very important, but also if you have children that are dealing with this. In 1967, no one went to psychologists, get therapy. I think we were wounded, many of us, for this. But life went on. We prevailed. We talk about resilience. We all have that in us. So high school for me was very difficult, but luckily at that time, Boyacigiller had a separate exam, and I was a good student, so letters of reference, my grades and all, and I got to go to Boyacigiller. I made 2 very important decisions when I was in college. One, that I would be a professor, that if I spent the rest of my life in a university, I'd be very happy. And 2, I married my college sweetheart. Wasn't perfect all the time, but it was very good. We had a wonderful life together. Here's us getting married. Zia was an electronics engineer, and we had been going to UCLA for our master's. We then moved up to Silicon Valley, where he had a wonderful career, became the quintessential Silicon Valley engineer. I, meanwhile, started at Berkeley. Berkeley was tough, let me tell you. When I entered the doctoral program, there were 20 of us, 3 women, 17 men. But I was very hardworking, and things went well, passed all my exams, and Zia and I decided to start a family. Belkis, who's here tonight, was born. It was the happiest time of my life. Since I'd lost my mother at a young age, I wanted very much to be a mother, and I wanted to have a career. And in my family, those were not viewed as mutually, they were things you could do together. Very happy when, on August 1st, 1983, in the middle of the night, we received a phone call. And what do you think in the middle of the night? Coming from London, where my father and brother were working, I thought it was my father. And I remember saying, and I'm not going to cry, but I may, and if I do, this is part of life as well. I remember my first words out of my mouth were, not Errol, not my only sibling. I'm sorry. But this is also what life is. Errol had passed away unexpectedly, and I was brokenhearted. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. I couldn't sleep. But I had this wonderful little baby girl that I was nursing, and so I had to, and life went on. Zia and I wanted to have 2 children, so luckily, Esen was born 2 years later. Meanwhile, I'm still a doctoral student, but I finished my dissertation and graduate. I have a lesson here, too. When I was at Berkeley, people always came up and said, Nakiye, how did you have 2 children and finish your doctorate? No one ever came up to me and ever said, How did you complete your doctorate after your beloved brother died? This was another lesson I learned. We don't like talking about death. It's hard to talk about death. But we need to. It's a reality in life. And organizations need to embrace, need to help us. Hopefully in your lives, your professional life and your personal life will always support it. But it doesn't always. So we need to be there for each other. We need to talk about it more. Then we come to a wonderful period in life. I am raising these two daughters I love. Zia is doing wonderfully in Silicon Valley. I love being a professor. Very fantastic stage in life. 2003, I'm invited to be dean at Sabanci. I loved it. It was hard. It was the first time I had a managerial role. The university was very young. We had to recruit. But for me, it was a labor of love. I worked very hard, nonstop. For 10 years, I was the longest termed dean at Sabanci. But fantastic. I was, by the way, viewed as successful. And this is something I shouldn't be shy in sharing. So I had a great career. And then when my 10 years was up, I was going to take a sabbatical because we were afforded that. And I had invitations from Australia, Singapore, Boston. And Zia said, this time I'm going to come with you. I had time, and we were going to travel. I stepped down from the deanship September 1st. October 16th was the second day of Bayram. It was my auntie's birthday, and Zia didn't feel well. We took him to the hospital at Acıbadem. Unfortunately, you don't want to get sick during Bayram. Everybody's on vacation. About 10 days later, we find out that Zia has a very terrible cancer. And the doctor here, who was very good, said, you have to take him to the States because it's not a cancer I see very often. Went back to California. Zia is treated at Stanford. The first appointment we had with the oncologist, she said, well, I have patients that are alive after 4 to 5 years. And I say, how could, I'm thinking to myself, how stingy, 4 to 5 years, what's that? He had the best care. He was operated on by Steve Jobs' doctor, the best that medicine had, but it was too difficult a cancer, and Zia passed away. So, but luckily I had 2 wonderful daughters. I had this incredible extended family, and I have the beautiful sea I love so much. So life goes on. And let me tell you, I'm blessed to have a happy personality. I tend to see the glass half full. But let me tell you, it's not just me. I started reading a lot about death and resilience after Zia's passing. And I read a great book by, with a professor, you have to have a book and the citation. A great book by George Bonomo, The Other Side of Sadness. And George has been researching how people deal with death his whole career. And what he's found is that the majority of people can deal with it. That the most of us, as human beings, we are hardwired to survive. We are hardwired to survive. We can get through even the worst days. We can smile. And in fact, when you're going through bad times, if you smile, it helps you. So I want to tell you, smile, stay happy. Hopefully, you will not have, as we call in Turkish, hopefully all the deaths in your life will be in turn. But know that it's going to happen, and I'm sorry to be the one on the down note, but we can get through it. We can get through it together. Count on your family. Count on your friends. Talk about these issues. And then in the workplace, we need to not pretend it doesn't exist. Now, I have one way of thinking about family life and personal life and professional life, is that you hope that they enhance each other. I hope that at the end of the workday, when you're going home, you're happy to be going home. And in the morning, when you're going to work, you're happy to be going to work. But sometimes something happens on one side. Something can happen in your workplace that makes family life hard. And sometimes things can happen at home that make the workplace hard. We as companies, we as managers, we as leaders need to understand that. We need to give people some support, much more than we do historically. So that is my lesson to you, if you will, from my age. I also want to tell you that I smile a lot. I think it's a good thing to smile. It helps us get to the day. The only time when it causes problems is I always have to tell my students, don't be fooled by the smile. I'm a tough teacher. Thank you for listening to me.